just kind of the first question is, how did you get interested in music to begin with?
I think birth had something to do with it. Um, yeah, I think my parents were quite musical. My dad in his younger days he played drums and clarinet and ukulele in his hometown of Winkler, Manitoba, southern Manitoba. By the time I came around, he did the music had he never played other than some piano. I never saw him play those other instruments. Ukulele occasionally, never clarinet. But so the music was in him. My mother was quite musical, piano, playing the organ. So I think as I grew up, I was surrounded by a lot of classical music, a lot of swing music from my parents' era. They'd have parties, and stride piano players would come over and they would sing, and lots of that. And my dad loved classical music. He would air conduct orchestras in the living room. He would listen to lots of opera. He was a big opera buff. So that range of music from the contemporary to the classical was around me when I was in vitro, certainly, and as I grew up. And I have an older brother and sister who were into the music of their era. So the boy bands of the 50s, and Elvis, etc. And then when I came along, I loved the sounds that I was hearing, starting with the folk world. Lots of Joni, lots of Gordon Lightfoot, lots of Beatles. So all of the musical
Mhm.
world was there at my disposal, and because I had a very good ear for music, and sang in choirs from grade 3 all the way through high school, university, I was constantly searching out a an outlet for my appreciation of the music.
So for myself and a lot of Canadians, we were first introduced to you through Fred Penner's Place, but obviously you had a whole successful career before that ever came along. So can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure, before Fred Penner's Place, in the 70s, I made a decision, because I lost my younger sister Susie was born with Down syndrome, and she died in the early 70s. My father died a year later, so I had I had to make a decision about my life at that point. And so I started playing bars, lounges, anywhere that would listen to a young singer songwriter guitar player, and that led to working with a name you may be familiar with, Al Simmons, who is a
Mhm.
really a new age vaudevillian out of Winnipeg, and we were in a band called the Cornstalk Comedy Troupe for four years. We played across the country, did a little bit of television, a lot of, again, universities, bars, lounges. And over the 70s, as a decade, I was also doing uh, some radio drama, some stage work, a Manitoba Theatre Center, playing a character role in Death of a Salesman, and in Rainbow Stage, which is an outdoor musical venue in Winnipeg. I did character roles in things like Fiddler on the Roof, Hello Dolly, um, things like that for four seasons. And then after that was when my career turned to recording my first record, The Cat Came Back, in 1979. And once I was committed to vinyl, then I met Raffi, and linked with his company, and toured Canada for 5 years, until CBC came along and said, "We've been watching your progress, and we like what you're doing. Do you want to do a TV series?" And it was, sure, why not? And they put it in my lap. I had no uh, thought that I would ever do television. I had no thought that I would ever record an album, for that matter. I was just going with the flow, and the flow seemed to be carrying me along quite nicely. And so
And
I sat and did my soul searching to find what kind of television program would make sense to me. And I wanted a natural or environment, something outdoors, because I appreciated that. And Fred Penner's Place was created, from my concept, and the writers came along, and the studios joined in, and we designed the space that I would work in, and then it flowed from there for 900 plus shows.
now, with Fred Penner's Place, what was it like to kind of you're going from having, successful touring career and everything to suddenly you're on television cross country and all these children know who you are? Was it kind of a big adjustment for you?
Not an adjustment, because right from the beginning there were huge audiences, because the timing was so right, with Rafi, Sharon Olsen Bram, and myself coming onto the scene at a a critical time in Canadian children's music history. The baby boomers were demanding quality entertainment for their kids, and the three of us, the three groups, we answered that call with a lot of really good albums, and right away, right from the bat, the tours were falling into place. So when Fred Penny's Place came along, it was just a really good supplement to what was already happening. So when I mean, any place I went anywhere in Canada, they had already, they were watching, because CBC and CTV really were the only networks that were doing national television. So people knew who I was, in some of the smallest communities, that you could imagine, people were aware of me. So that part, I guess, was a bit of an adjustment to go to Rankin Inlet in north of Winnipeg, in Nunavut, and be waiting in the airport for a plane, and a family came in, a an Inuit family, the mother with the big shawl, and the baby sitting in the back, and I mean, just right off the land, Fred Penner, oh, nice to see it was okay. I guess this thing is really making a lot of contact. That was a very, very powerful and positive awareness.
Did you feel any pressure with the show because A, you were coming on, or you're not replacing, but your slot used to be for the Friendly Giant, but you were also, I think, you aired after Mr. Dress Up. So did you find any pressure kind of being between those two in terms of your show?
Well, I was the giant killer for a while. he was I was the replacement for Friendly Giant, and then our shows jumped around. There was that hour from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock before Sesame Street would come on. Mr. Dress Up traditionally had 10:30 to 11. I had some 15-minute shows that were split with Under the Umbrella Tree with Holly the Rock, and then that evolved into a lot of half-hour programs. So we didn't feel any. It was like we were part of, and then CBC was pitching it that way. You're part of that hour. It was clearly defined as, this is a special time for families to connect. And parents could trust that CBC was bringing some quality entertainment for the children at that point. Yeah, so I never felt any pressure there to whatever position it was. I was just having the time of my life. That's all.
And then when the show ended, how, did you kind of know what you wanted to do after that point, or it had been such an important part of your life, you kind of had to figure out what the next step was?
Definitely next step. I had no the the ending of the series was unceremonious, to say the least. I went in expecting to record three shows on the last day, and as I was going to the studio, I was writing songs as I would do. I often wrote on the way to doing the program. I'd get to the studio, I'd go into the music room, I'd say, here's what I've got for today. Dave Jandrish, who sadly just passed away recently, was my musical director. He would look at I'd play the songs for him. He would chart them out, give them to the other players, and I'd go into makeup. I'd go you know, into to do the show, and then the director came in and said, "Oh, by the way, the show is ending," and it was, oh, completely out of the blue. I had no expectation that this was it, and so I went. What I had no choice. There was nothing I could say. So we recorded the morning show, and then I went. We had lunch, and I'm sitting in my dressing room, and I'm working on music for the afternoon. And the floor director comes in and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm just getting ready for the last shows in the afternoon." He said, "No, that's it. You're done." Oh, okay. So I was in shock, and the set was torn apart and basically thrown into the ether. And because I still had a touring career, that maintained. There was still festivals, there was still gigs to be played, but it was the creativity that I was bringing to Fred Penner's place. I wrote, hundreds of songs for the series over all that time. So the bigger question for me was, how am I going to, or what is going to replace my creative energy? Because this was so clearly, a daily process for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was I wasn't sure where that was going to go, and I was in shock for a while, and I just sort of maintained whatever I had, and then I tried one direction that didn't work, and then a TV series came along called TP Tales, which was done by Eagle Vision out of Winnipeg. It was an Ojibwe-based puppet series that they had many non-Indigenous people being involved, and they asked me to do the music for it. So hallelujah, I dove into that one, and we did 2 seasons. Again, dozens and dozens of songs I wrote for that. So that filled that gap for another chunk of time in the late no in the early 2000s. I think we did that up to around 2008 9.
Then, yeah, so the people who grew up with you, like myself, are
Yeah,
in college and such, and you're starting to play those kinds of,
yeah,
you're playing to that crowd who, grew up with you.
yeah. Yeah, I followed it, which was really, really fascinating for me to do that, because I saw Mr. Dressup do a lunch presentation for, I think it was maybe Sheridan College in Ontario, and there were like the whole college came to see him, and that put a little bug in my ear of, oh, maybe rather than just trying to play the young children that were being born, going back to where the first generation was, who are, as you said, are now at university. Maybe that's not a bad idea. And then I started playing, every campus from Victoria to Halifax, doing doing the bar night, playing at 10 o'clock in the evening instead of 10 o'clock in the morning, which was a bit of an adjustment. But that was an absolute delight. I had so much fun doing that, and the kids who are now adults were in tears. They were so overwhelmed that I was doing that. They came and sang and participated, and just had as much fun as they had as when they were kids. So there was a great equalizing process when I went in. Everybody's 5 years old all of a sudden,
Hmm.
including the teachers, including the.
And what was that like for you to kind of, see the impact that you had on these people who growing up and, how they remember the songs and like you said, they're 5 years old again.
It was um, I mean, what it was like for me was it was a little overwhelming because there were some some big bars, and a lot of people were coming, and they obviously felt connected enough with me that they wanted to do that. And I think part of my like I never in my life ever had real expectations of where any of this would go.
Mhm.
I did this because it was it was something I needed to do. Coming out of the mortality checks with my sister and father, and it was like, let's try this, let's try that, let's build this, let's go there. Got 13 years of this series, great. Gonna go do this series here, fine. Let's gonna tour the bars. All of this was just grabbing me by the scruff of my neck and throwing me into a venue. I never really planned any of this out. So when the audiences were there to support this, seemingly um, uncharted territory, it was fabulous. This is the best. This is great. Life is great. I have nothing, absolutely nothing in my creative world, in my career, to regret or want to replace with anything.
And then just more recently, obviously we get through COVID and all of that. What have you been up to more recently, with music and everything?
Well, during the COVID years, I still practice, pretty much on a daily basis. Whatever instruments are at hand, mostly guitar, but once in a while I'll go into my ukulele world, or my wife and I we created from scratch dulcimers with our dear friend Rick Scott, who's a dulcimer master, and so we did that. I worked with a composer out of Ontario. His name is Charles Cousins, and we wrote. He did the music. I wrote a story that that I'm now sort of shopping to a variety of places, trying to think of where it's going to go. It has the potential. I'm not going to give too much away on it because we're still playing with it, but it could be a really interesting musical. It could be an animation. It could be a movie. It has all these potentials. So I'm in the midst of trying to develop that into something else. I'm working on my dare I call it a memoir.
Mm.
I've got lists and lists of stories that from my lifetime that I think might be an interesting thing for people to read, but who knows where that'll go. So I'm certainly not slowing down or not restricted in any way by the uh, by the age. I'm 78, almost 78 now, in a month and a bit. So septuagenarianism hasn't stopped me from finding some path to creativity.
And then just the last question, if you could just sum up what you hope people got out of your show or your career or your music, what you hope it taught them, how would you sum it up?
As my wife would say, what the audience took away from any of my work is none of my business. You know, but what I feel in my heart is I what I felt I created and am creating along the way is is serious. It's not superficial. It's not just a bunch of crazy songs and jumping up and down, laka laka, we're done. In my life, in my career, and I think because I wanted to honor my sister, who was born with Down syndrome, and I think I learned so much about the value of music in her life. Really changed my perspective of what music was in general. So everything that I've tried to create has had that little corner to it. I want to say something that goes not not just from the superficial, but goes into your spirit, into your heart, that makes you think just a little bit, that makes you realize that there is a power in music. Well, the mantra that I've often quoted is never underestimate your ability to make a difference in the life of a child. And that stays with me on a daily basis. I write, I create with that hope that something I'm saying is being received by a listener, and will give them pause to think for a moment, and be stronger and more creative in their own souls.